Hello and welcome back to Sino-Babble. So this is another news discussion edition. I did my first one last week. As before, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get like the first half and then the second half will be on Buy Me a Coffee. And if you're on Buy Me a Coffee, you get the free version for being one of my amazing supporters. I have a bit of a cough today, so I've got my tea ready to go. And in general, this week's theme is a bit more international relations focus. Last week we tried to avoid the tariffs, but there's no avoiding the tariff chat, but I've tried my very best to avoid it this week with a few more different kinds of news. Okay, so let's crack on with our first story. So I just said it's international relations related, and then I'm immediately going to talk about AI. The other stories are international related, I promise, but this is just something that caught my eye earlier today, which is that Deepseek has opened up roles for product and design as startup keeps mum on new AI model. So this is basically news that Deepseek may or may not be planning to release some sort of product to the market because they're hiring for different types of jobs. So the article reads, Chinese startup Deepseek has initiated an urgent recruitment for product and design roles in Beijing and Hangzhou, fanning speculation over its work on new AI model that it has remained tight-lipped about. The job search notice posted on Tuesday said candidates are expected to help build a next-generation intelligent product experience based on LLM technology, according to official WeChat account. LLM is the technology underpinning generative AI services like ChatGPT and Deepseek's eponymous chatbot app. This marks the first time that Deepseek, which was established by a tech entrepreneur Liang Wenfeng in 2023, has published job openings for product manager, product design, and visual design. The Hangzhou-based firm has largely focused on fundamental AI model research. So this is essentially speculation based on nothing other than job ad postings that Deepseek is basically transitioning from essentially a research operation into a proper company. A bit more like OpenAI, which is clearly focused on how are we going to turn this technology into a revenue generating model. For a while, Deepseek said that they weren't really concentrating on that. They were more focused on the technology, but now it's clear that they are transitioning at least to something. They're trying to make something, but we don't know what that is. The company is also in the process of hiring a chief financial officer and a chief operating officer, as well as 4 types of jobs in the fields of research and engineering. Despite massive interest in the company and its founder, Deepseek has not engaged with the public beyond releasing a few product updates and publishing research papers. The firm's last LLM upgrade came nearly a month ago when it released the improved capabilities of its open source V3 model. According to a Reuters report, Deepseek could introduce its new R2 reasoning model early next month, but the company has kept silent over the progress of such a release. They generated worldwide attention from late December 2024 to January after consecutively releasing 2 advanced open source AI models, V3 and R1, which were developed at a fraction of the cost and computing power that major tech companies typically require for LLM projects. The announcement sent shockwaves across Wall Street and Silicon Valley. We kind of touched on this last week as well when we were talking about NVIDIA, which does come up later in this article, but Deepseek and Chinese AI firms in general are being seen as a competitor to US firms, mainly OpenAI, which is really the only large language model that's like undergone like mass adoption, is clearly vying to be a sort of corporate entity. The founder has tried to like integrate himself into sort of like the business world and like going around speaking on all the podcasts and on all the big stages and things like that, talking about the future of technology and why AI is going to destroy the world, blah, blah, blah. Deepseek is a lot more sort of, not covert, I don't know how to put it, like just cool, calm and collected, I suppose. You don't hear a lot about them. Liang Wenfeng is clearly like an enthusiastic geek, but I also wonder to what extent it's the CCP's influence or the party state's influence on the company to not reveal too much because they don't want competitors knowing what they're up to. So it could just be that, you know, they are just simple researchers who are not very commercially minded and are now in the process of hiring commercially minded people, thinking about how to turn their research into a product. But there could also be some influence from the state in that we know so much about the aims and the goals of OpenAI because, you know, in America, that sort of business dealings is very free, but obviously in China, the state has a stake in that type of technology. Obviously, Deepseek's research is open source, but whatever commercial products they make, it's very likely that the Chinese government will have a stake in that, either via what's known as a golden share, or just generally having shares in the company in general. And if the company is big enough, they will have CCP members also as part of the company, just sort of like monitoring that what they do is in compliance with the constitution, blah, blah, blah. But as this article also points out, other tech companies in China are using Deepseek's open source technology to develop their own products. So it does also make sense that Deepseek would want to develop its own products and make some money as well. Li Kaifu, founder and chief executive of Chinese startup 01 AI, last month said his company was leveraging Deepseek's technology to sell AI solutions to corporate clients, particularly in the finance, video game, and legal sectors. 01 AI in turn has ceased development of its own AI model. So other companies in China are essentially reliant on Deepseek because Deepseek is so far ahead of the curve, and it seems that they might also be ahead of OpenAI, hence the delay of ChatGPT 5. And I think there were quite a lot of complaints that ChatGPT 4 was not as good as a lot of people had hoped or had expected. So it could very well be that the next iteration of Deepseek could be sort of like the next step that companies were expecting to see from OpenAI that they haven't seen yet. Researchers, investors, and the general public are closely watching how Deepseek can keep making breakthroughs in its industry amid tightening US measures that bar the export of NVIDIA's advanced AI chips to China. NVIDIA chief executive Jensen Huang had a meeting with Deepseek's Liang during his visit to China last week, according to a report by the FT. Neither NVIDIA nor Deepseek confirm whether that meeting took place. We did cover that last week as well, but again, just interesting to see that NVIDIA is trying to keep the doors open where other entities might be trying to keep them out. I am by no means an expert on AI stuff, as you saw by how I sort of like grappled with that very basic article, but there is a really good Substack by Grace Shao called AI Proem. I know Grace, she's really nice, and she used to be a tech reporter in China. She now focuses on AI more generally, but I highly recommend you check out her Substack if you are interested in all things AI. There's another Substack called AI Supremacy. If you already like AI stuff, you probably already know about it. That's by Michael Spencer. And yeah, those will basically be everything you need if you want to keep up to date with what's happening in the AI sphere, particularly in China. Okay, the next story is kind of like a follow-up to a story that we've covered on the Substack before, which is that China has executed the man who stabbed a Japanese schoolboy. So this happened back in September of last year. He was sentenced to death in January for attacking the boy who had been walking to school. And at the time, this case caused a lot of heightened fears among Japanese people living in China. There was one company, it probably says in this article, which I should read, Toyota and Panasonic were issuing warnings to their employees who lived in China. Some of them offered them flights back to Japan as well. So it was a big deal because there had been a couple of other cases of aggression against against foreign nationals in China by Chinese nationals. So even though it says here the final verdict on the case made no mention of Japan, it was considered to be sort of like a nationalist case, and the whole thing took place very quickly. This guy was the event happened in September. The man was convicted in January and he's been executed in April. So this has been a very rapid case as well. So if it does feel as if there is some international relations play behind this. I don't know what the normal schedule for executions is in China, but this feels very, very quick. So like I mentioned, we actually covered the story in a bit more detail just after it happened. So this is October of last year. I wrote a Substack about xenophobia and anti-Japanese sentiment in China, and in it I discussed the case. I also tried to put it in the context of greater Japan-China relations, which are very fraught, you might say. So there are kind of two sides to it. The first side is obviously Chinese nationalism, which has arguably grown a lot in the past decades, particularly since like the mid 2010s, when Xi Jinping's ideas about things like the Chinese dream have sort of risen in general popularity. I'm not saying that this is what every Chinese person thinks, but there's been more emphasis, I think, on Chineseness and loyalty to China, nationalistic sentiment. I have friends actually who, one of them told me that she'd been raised to be I think it's called like a little pinky or a little pink, basically somebody who's like raised to be fervently nationalistic about China, and you know, kind of like anything negative that comes out about China in foreign press is basically just deliberate slander. It's all made up, it's all hate and things like that. And so I talk about sort of like the historical context of that, which is obviously things that we've spoken about before, the century of humiliation, particularly the incidents that took place during the Sino-Japanese War and World War II, atrocities like the Nanjing incident, but generally Japanese atrocities against China from 1931 onwards when they invaded Manchuria. Japan in particular has argued that these nationalistic sentiments and these anti-Japanese sentiments have been stoked more in the past few years. And then on top of that, you have modern day Japan-China relations, which has been fraught by things like the fact that Japan hasn't apologized about things that happened during the Sino-Japanese War, and also other international relations incidents such as the debates over who do the Senkaku Islands, and the Diaoyu Islands, who do they belong to, part of the larger sort of like South China Sea, East China Sea, debates where China basically feels like it has ownership over all of that territory and their neighbours would disagree with that. This sentiment is also evolving in that younger people in China and Japan are kind of sort of trying to move past these sentiments and kind of move into not necessarily a friendly relationship, but a more cordial relationship. There's more trade of goods, trade of ideas, swapping of like students and cultural exchanges and things like that. So the situation has the potential to evolve past current tensions with the next generation of people, but it still remains to be seen. The majority of Chinese people do not have friendly sentiments towards Japan, I would say. So that Substack post is also available to read if you want to read it. So if you're watching on the YouTube channel, that's the end of this portion for now, but you're welcome to go over to the Buy Me a Coffee and become a member to watch the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.